We have to talk about marriage within a context. Otherwise, it's empty. We'll just be having academic arguments. Now, back to this question of love and mercy and tranquility. Nuru once said something, that where there is sufficient love and mercy and understanding and companionship, you don't even start talking about rights and responsibilities. It's not a big issue. That if you have to fall back on, but it's my right, but it's your responsibility, right there is a clue for you to know your marriage is suffering in some way. If you have to go check the books, is it my responsibility to cook the food as a woman under Sharia? If you have to start having that discussion, somewhere something is not as it should be. So marriage is half of faith. It's a big test. Now, one thing it tests is this thing we've been talking about, conflict. Because no matter what discussion we want to have about building a family, we cannot avoid talking about conflict. As I said earlier, it's a natural part of marriage. It's as natural to marriage as breathing is to you. As long as you speak, you have an opinion, you have a certain level of independent judgment, and so does your spouse, you will have disagreements. Even the best of them had disagreements. The Prophet ﷺ had disagreements with his wives, not with one, with more than one on occasion, and at one point disagreed strongly with practically all of them. And when one reads the narrations, you start to understand how not to be scared of conflict within your marriage. Some of us are frightened of it. You have this quarrel, and suddenly you think, well, this marriage is about to crash. It's over. Sometimes we get so worried about conflict that we prefer to avoid it altogether. That's when we become yes wives or yes husbands. We don't agree, but we are not going to say so because we don't want to cause a quarrel. We don't want an argument. We don't want a disagreement. So we agree to everything. We impose upon ourselves a gag order. We know what gag order is. That's when usually the court says nobody should talk about this in the news. You cannot discuss this. The court says it. So we impose it on ourselves to not raise the fact that we are dissatisfied or displeased or we disagree. And as I said, then that's when you know there's a problem. Because as Nuru said a few minutes ago, within marriage, you should be free to be yourself. If you are not free, then it means you are not at peace. And if you are not at peace, your marriage isn't at peace because it takes the two of you. 1 half plus half is 1. I believe that's still this way it was when I was taught that. So if someone is not at peace, then the marriage is not at peace. And a person cannot be at peace when within your heart you have thoughts, you have opinions, you have feelings, and the feelings are intruding on how you even feel about your spouse, but your spouse has no idea because you are agreeing to everything they say. We go back and look at Sirah. We start with Aisha, radiallahu anha. She was no yes wife, even though her husband was the Prophet of Allah and would have revelation from Allah from time to time about things. If she had an opinion, she was going to share it. If she had a question, she was going to ask it. And if she disagreed, she was going to say she disagreed with something. And if she was displeased with him, she was going to express the fact that she was displeased with him. However, she knew how to do it, with love and with compassion. She was frank but kind. You can call it frank kindness. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in one narration, was reported to have said to her, "I know when you are displeased with me." And she said, "How?" And he said, "When you are happy with me and you want to take an oath, you say, by the Lord of Muhammad. But when you are displeased with me, you say, by the Lord of Ibrahim, she refers to another prophet. Like right now, I'm so displeased with you, I'm not calling your name in this matter, so like step aside. That was her own way of expressing it. So there was no insult in it, no judgment, nothing. Just saying, right now, I feel a little disconnected from you. My sister-in-law would sometimes say to her husband that I love you a little less right now. And I borrowed that phrase, and sometimes I'll say to Nuru, right now I'm not feeling the love that much. So there are always nice ways of saying, right now you're making me upset. But when you say it like that, and you laugh just at the silliness of what has just come out of your own mouth, and your spouse laughs, you see that temperature that should have been rising just begin to drop. So when Aisha would say, I swear by the Lord of Ibrahim, I'm sure somewhere in her own mind was thinking, silly me. But it helped. And the Prophet ﷺ got the message. So her displeasure was usually clear. The other wives, it was the same thing with them. If they were not happy, it was clear to the Prophet. He didn't have to second guess. And for all that has been said about the Prophet's good character, his nobleness, his niceness, his kindness, when he was displeased with them, they didn't have to guess. He was very tolerant, very forgiving, both within the home and outside. And these are conclusions one can draw from reading hadith after hadith about him and his life. But it's the same hadith that let us know that when he was not happy with them, it was clear. He separated himself from them and went and sat on the roof. What stronger message is that than I'm not happy with the whole lot of you? And the whole lot of them are like, we are not happy with you. And did the marriage die or crash or burn? No. They had their moments. Umar radiallahu anha was once having a disagreement with his wife. He was talking and she was talking back. So for us, that's lesson number one. In a conflict situation, if the marriage is healthy and the marriage is to be healthy, we have to allow our spouses to talk back. If we say A, B, C, we should allow them say D, E, F. We'll come to how to say it. But as we express, we allow them to express. Not, why will you talk to me? How dare you? For whatever reason. You, this man, you lost your job. I've been paying the bills. And then you are disagreeing with me over this. You should be appreciative. Or I'm the man of the house. I'm a degree above you. Have you forgotten it's in the Quran? You shouldn't be talking back to me. For the Prophet ﷺ and his companions and their wives, they understood that when it comes to marriage, they really were partners. And that in conflict, it was perfectly okay to talk. And so when Umar's wife was responding to him, he then looked at her and said, you are the one talking to me this way. That is it Islam that has so elevated you? I'm paraphrasing here. But he was referring to the fact that in the days of Jahiliyyah, a woman could not stand and be talking to Umar the way his wife was doing right now. And when he made the comment about the way she was talking back to him and saying, it must be Islam that has given you this. And she said, yes, I can talk back to you. If the best of them, his wives, talk to him, that they make him so angry, he doesn't speak to them for 3 days from their talking to him, who are you? In other words, the Prophet's wives talk. They talk back till he gets angry. Important lesson, he never told them to stop. Because it happened over and over again. He understood this is how it works. And so when Umar was so shocked at hearing that and wondering, is my daughter Hafsa one of them? So he abandoned his own quarrel with his wife and took off to go and try and resolve, my daughter should not be one of those women. And when he went to the house, and I think it was Salama he met one of the wives. Who?
Yeah. His wife told him. Umar's wife told him, when the best of them, that's the Prophet ﷺ, even his wife speak back to him, he said, including Hafsa, which is his daughter, she said yes. So like, what's your problem? So he goes to Hafsa and he rebukes her. Don't ever speak to the Prophet like that again, etc., etc., etc. He's her father. So he... Exactly. So he makes her like, don't do it again. She keeps quiet. He asks, do other wives do the same? He said, yes. So he got on a mission. Went to look for another of the wives of the Prophet, Salama. He went, I hear you people talk to the Prophet in this way, etc., etc. Don't you know who he is? Da, 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 da. She said, hold on, hold on. Is this Umar bin Khattab the one who is dabbling into the family affairs of the Prophet? And he kept quiet. Oops, yeah, exactly. And he moved away. Yeah. And the point being, this was a natural part of a healthy relationship of people who are not walking on eggs. No, it's not like, careful, you may tread on something. They had adab in how they disagreed, but it was an environment in which you could speak up. If you weren't happy, you made it clear you weren't happy. And if sometimes you had to shout or cry to make it clear, that was how the environment was.
Still on this issue, we are spending so much time on it because sometimes it's perceived as though conflict destroys the marriage. And the point we are trying to make is that it doesn't. There was this situation where the Prophet ﷺ had taken like a vow of not keeping property. So whenever he got something, he gave away. Spoils of war, anything that came his way, he would give away. Someone would give him a gift of an animal or food. He would give his family, and then he would give most of it away. And it got to a point, this is from explanations following a particular verse of the Quran and some hadith. It got to a point where the wives were no longer satisfied with that lifestyle. Like, okay, we agreed to marry you. We didn't agree to live like this, where we practically have nothing. There are days there wouldn't be food. And we know we can have food, but because you keep giving away, then we end up with nothing. So they got together. I can't remember now if it's all of them, but they got together and they said with one voice, we are not happy, we want more. They weren't asking for extravagance. They were saying we want a more comfortable life. Not this one of what people would call poverty. But it was a conscious choice the Prophet ﷺ made. And they were no longer comfortable with it. They were not satisfied with his choice. And they made it very clear. This is one of those situations where he disagreed with what they wanted and they disagreed with him. They then had this separation, where he stayed away from them for some days. And then a verse of the Quran was revealed, where Allah was saying to the wives of the Prophet, essentially saying he should call his wives and tell them, if they want Allah and his Prophet, they will get a great reward for it. But if they still want what they wanted, was like, we want the basics of life, then the Prophet should invite them, give them, there are some words, terms used in the Quran, goodly, kindly, give them gifts, separate from them kindly. And several times I would look at the verse and say, it's interesting, in this verse there is no scolding of the wives for what they wanted. No scolding for disagreeing. No scolding for holding their position strongly. Just a clear message about if you want to stay in a marriage, then face the reality of that situation and take it. If you can't handle it, then you find the best way of separating. And I think when we look at this verse of the Quran and the incidents that led to it, there is no bigger lesson to tell us there's nothing wrong with conflict or with disagreement. Someone once described marriage in Islam like a contract. The lady who said so, that Muslim marriages are just like contracts. She wasn't a Muslim. I felt offended. And so why will you describe it as just a contract, just a business? But later, as I thought about it, I realized, in a sense, she's right. Because in a contract, we understand what this contract is about. We know what the deal is. Who is getting what? Who's doing what? When, how, when? We talk about it. And if at some point we can no longer fulfill the terms of the contract, we say, let this contract be terminated. Let it end. And we talk again about the terms of ending the contract. It may seem very cold, but in a sense, that's what a marriage really is like. So if people disagree in a marriage, you have to talk the same way you negotiate through a business deal. Sometimes you sit at the table and you come to an agreement about a deal, a construction job or a service that's to be delivered, and you talk about terms. Now, one person goes away to start working on the terms of the contract and realizes, okay, this isn't going to work, or this is going to make me do this job at a loss, and says, please, can we come back to the table and renegotiate? In marriage, sometimes you have to come back to the table and renegotiate, and at times you can't do that without tension. So we've already said it's a natural part of it, and there should be no gag order. People should be free to speak. Now, in that speaking, we have to mind our manners. Now, this is where the big job is. This is where the test of faith is. It's very easy to disagree. Very easy. I sometimes see in the class, someone says something, another student says, no, that's not correct, or that's not true. And once the teacher says, why do you disagree? The student suddenly shuts up. Because disagreeing is easy. Doing it right is what is not so easy. Now, in a conflict situation, there are some things we need to be very careful about. Because when we are not careful about these things, we are actually killing our marriages. Because the experts say it's not the quarrel, it's not the conflict that kills the marriage, it's certain things we do when quarreling. Doing those things doesn't mean the marriage will fail. But if you keep doing it and these things become a definite pattern, then more likely than not, that marriage is going to fail, no matter what anybody else does. The first is that in a conflict situation, you have to set the right trajectory. What do we mean by this? Someone studying marriages said he found that quite more often than not, the first 3 minutes of any conflict discussion usually tell you whether that conflict discussion will go well or not go well. If the beginning is harsh, starts very harshly, really hot, that usually that discussion is going to go very badly, no matter what they try to do afterwards. So key lesson there is whatever discussion we are going to have about a disagreement with our husbands or our wives, we have to mind how we start. A metaphor Nuru always uses is if you are going to fight somebody, physical fight, there's some quarrel and you are going to get into a physical fight with this person. Inshallah, it won't happen, but let's assume it does. And the person puts up his fists. He said, you are more likely to put up your fists as well. If the person picks up a pillow, you are mentally going to look for something about as soft as a pillow. But if the person brings out one great big old hulking stick, a stout one, you are going to start looking for things like rocks, stones, the table, the chair, because that tells you what this person is preparing for. And aggression builds on aggression. So if someone slaps you, you are likely to try and slap back. But if the person grabs you and sinks their teeth in, then you are likely to do something far more aggressive. Someone is laughing. That's how some people fight. It's teeth first. Other things follow. Not just children, yes, even grown-ups. Even I use that. Usually it's a good tactic when the person you are fighting is bigger, taller, heavier. So teeth can be very useful. Anyway, on a more serious note, first lesson about how to quarrel. Yes, we had said we'll talk about that. Sets the right trajectory from the beginning, so that the person, your spouse, gets the signal. I'm not out to kill you. I'm actually trying to resolve an issue. The second thing is actually four for the price of one. 4 things to be careful of. One is criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I'll explain, inshallah. Now, when we have a disagreement with our spouse, sometimes it's about something our spouse has done. So we would complain to our spouse about what he or she did, or didn't do, or failed to do. When you are complaining, usually that's when people will say you are quarreling. But when you are complaining, we are using complain now in a very technical way. You are actually saying, you said you would do X, you didn't do it. You did Y, I wasn't happy about it. I don't like what you did. Simple complaint. You are staying on the issue. So if this is your spouse, though I'm sure your spouse is far more handsome than this, or your spouse to be. So if this is your spouse, or this one, let me give her a nice tudung. And then this is what they did, X, Y, Z. When you complain, you stay on the issue. You stay here. You didn't do, you didn't say, you said you would and you didn't, you did it this way, you stay on the issue. When you criticize, you cross from here to here. And criticism comes when you do certain things. One is you take a label and you paste it on your spouse. A nasty label. Very common labels: lazy, greedy, unappreciative, mean, insensitive. Someone there is making me laugh. You want to help with a label? So you cross over from here to here. Your spouse said, let me look for an example. He or she would help to pick up the children from school because you have some serious engagement. Let's say you had to go visit your sick mother. So your spouse said, I would pick up the kids, even though you usually are the one to do it. Then for some reason, someone calls you from school and tells you that the children are still in school, 2 hours after school closed. You ask your spouse, what happened? Your spouse tells you about the thing that distracted him or her, which on a scale is nothing compared to your sick mother. So you could complain about, you said you'll pick the kids, you didn't. Made me feel bad to leave the kids sitting out in the sun, to think of the kids sitting out there just waiting. You should have. I'm not happy that you didn't. That's complaint. Why didn't you pick the kids up? You never get your priorities right. You're always mixing things up. This is typical you. This is just you. You are being so inconsiderate. I had to leave my sick mother and go and pick up the kids. Why would you do that? You never think about other people, just you. Sounds familiar? Yeah. That's labeling. It's also judging. Where you take what the person has done and you reach a conclusion about who the person is, therefore, about this whole person. Now, somebody is probably protesting in his or her mind, but it's true. She is like that. Perhaps that's not the point, however. The point is, when you give somebody a label, it's very difficult for you or them to tear the label off. Once you have categorized your spouse as lazy, insensitive, or whatever, you've put them in this bottle, you've corked the bottle, they can't get out in your mind. And you won't let them out because you've labeled them, the job is done. So even when they sometimes try to repair the damage, you don't see the repair because you just keep thinking lazy, greedy, unappreciative, yeah, keep trying, it's not working. And that is actually what kills a marriage. Because right there, you have killed the ability of this half to come up to the level that helps the marriage survive. With your label, you've left the person in a particular position. And it's very difficult for the human mind to see beyond labels. Because the same way that labels help us deal with people very quickly, it can also stop us from seeing when they are changing or when they are doing the right thing. Another thing that happens when we criticize is generalizations. So let's say, for instance, your spouse is from Kuantan, and you've been hearing stories about how men or women from Kuantan behave. I'm just saying, I don't know anything about anybody. I'm using Kuantan because we went there not long ago. And we had a very nice time, mashallah. So, now your spouse forgets to pick up the kids. You don't stay on the issue of forgetting to pick up the kids. You don't even stay on the issue of your spouse being insensitive. You go, you take all the sins, real or imagined, of all Kuantan men or women, you bring all of them and you drape your spouse in that blanket. Should I expect anything different from someone from Kuantan? You would ask. That is what you people do anyway. So-and-so's husband is from Kuantan. He did the same thing. So-and-so is from Kuantan. He did this thing. What is it with you Kuantan people? What's wrong with all of you? Apologies to all those from Kuantan. I'm using it as an example. But when that happens, that's criticism. It's a very personal attack on this person. The person bleeds, the marriage bleeds. And because marriage is half plus half is equal to 1, when you criticize, you are taking a bite out of this person, out of the person's emotions. The person psychologically is belittled by your words. And so half becomes quarter. And half plus quarter is not equal to 1. If that mathematical rule is still correct, then it's not equal to 1. So the marriage itself starts to die, especially if this becomes a pattern. And many times we tend to want to retaliate. So when you tell your spouse that you are insensitive, more often than not, your spouse will find a label and stick it back on you. Like, I'm not walking away with that name. I'll find one for you too. And so you just have this spiral, and things keep getting worse. Second, 2A, that's 2A. 2B, contempt. Contempt is when you look down on your spouse. When you go out of your way to bring your spouse down. Sometimes because of how hurt or angry you are. You feel, if I make this person a bit smaller, I will feel better. And we show our contempt sometimes through our facial expressions, the gestures we make to show, I don't think you are much, or what you have just said, I think it's absolutely stupid. And sometimes even by being very sarcastic. There was this story I heard of a husband and a wife who were having troubles in their marriage. And one of the main things they were quarreling about was the fact that the husband wouldn't help around the house. And the wife wasn't happy about it, and they were talking about it. And the husband then said, you know, I sometimes get so very tired when I come back that it's difficult for me to do such and such. But if I get about 15 minutes to relax, then I'll be able to do it. And the wife, it was said, was sitting at the table. She had her hands linked like this and her chin resting on her linked hands. Said her voice was very soft. And she said, so if I leave you alone for 15 minutes, that will solve the problem. And the way she said it, the way she phrased the question tells you she's not saying, I'm really thinking about what you're saying. She was being very sarcastic. Like, so if I don't talk to you for 15 minutes, you'll help around the house. And you can add things like, really, indeed, yeah. Then the man tried again, said, you know, if maybe you put a list up on the fridge of the things you want me to do, it would remind me. And she said, well, there was that other list, it didn't work. How will the list on the door help you now? Then the man tried yet again. Brought up another suggestion. She said, so that's a cure-all. It's going to cure everything, solve every problem. That was a put down, her sarcasm. Each time she tried, she put him down. In another situation, it was a wife who was having a discussion with her husband. The husband was saying, listen, we saved so much money. He was the major breadwinner. We bought you this expensive car. I bought myself a truck, a simpler car. I wash my car myself to save us money, but you insist your car should be sent to the car wash. And she was saying it's easier for you to wash your truck. She was pointing out the fact that, look, you are physically more able to do that than for me, a woman, to be washing a car. And he said, no, the point is that you are just spoiled. So we go to label, you are spoiled. And she said, okay, you find it so easy to wash cars. Will you help me wash my car? He said, no, I'm not helping you wash your car. And they said they kept having this discussion until this man just kept bringing the woman down. So contempt destroys the person. He comes back to this same effect and comes back to the impact on the entire marriage itself. Then there's defensiveness, where you constantly refuse to see how you have done something wrong. You've done something, your spouse points it out, you say, but it's because. But it's not like that. Or what of that other time where we keep dodging the actual issue of what we have done wrong? It stops us from resolving the issue. If you don't admit you've done something wrong, how do we repair it? Sometimes we get defensive because our spouse is either being too critical or is treating us in a contemptuous way. But as we always hear, two wrongs don't make a right. Somebody has to start from somewhere, has to break the circle. Another one is stonewalling. Stonewalling is when a person shuts down and refuses to even engage. Doesn't speak. One spouse is talking, the other person is not talking, perhaps not even looking at the person who's talking, is simply removing him or herself from the whole conversation, even though the person is still there. Stonewalling doesn't allow the conversation to flow. And we said the disagreement must be expressed in order for the marriage to be healthy. Now, if one person is shutting down, then that person is not saying anything, even though they are thinking things. The other person is talking and is getting more annoyed because this person has shut down. Interesting thing is men are more likely to stonewall than women. We'll talk more about differences, but while we are talking about stonewalling, we'll say this. And many women talk about their frustration. How sometimes the man isn't just stonewalling, he's AWOLing. He actually physically leaves the room or the house. And many women find it very frustrating, and they say that's a sign of insensitivity. Some say it's cowardice. Some say he just doesn't care. Some say he's disrespecting me. I was speaking and he walked away. He didn't want to resolve this. Researchers find, interestingly enough, that for a man to take off is actually helpful to him. Because usually, when the conflict starts, you would find both the husband and the wife are stressed. They are both stressed out. But they also know that for women find it easier to do what they call self-soothing. Women usually know how to calm themselves down faster than men do. It's not a plus or a minus, it just is. Something I read about recently, and I thought that's very interesting, was when they did a study, and they brought subjects into this room to study how they respond to stress based on gender. They said they deliberately did something to make some men feel disrespected while they were monitoring their heart rates, their pulse, and so on, and they noticed the men's stress level had risen, and that they remained stressed out for up to 20 minutes, even when the incident ended. And that for some of the men, what brought the stress level down was their ability to retaliate. Actually helped me understand why the boys in my school always want to revenge. Until I read that study, I kept saying, what is this thing about revenging? Now I understand. It's not the best way, but it's how biologically they respond. Someone upsets or offends you, their stress levels stay high, and it usually comes down when they can revenge. Not for all of them, but it happens. They said for the women in the study, however, they found their stress level went up, but it came down much faster. And it's when they tried to pressurize the women to retaliate that their stress level went up again. Gender differences. They say they are still trying to understand how this whole thing works. But if we take the lesson from the study, from what they know so far into marriage, then wives will not keep chasing the husband to finish the quarrel here and now. You will give him time to go and breathe because his blood pressure has just gone up because you said we need to talk. For some men, that's like... And for the woman, it's like, until I talk. So as we talk, we start to feel better. Meanwhile, the man is feeling worse steadily, and he needs to get away. So somebody would ask, so what then? The woman wants to talk, it helps her. The man wants to run, it helps him. If he's running and she's talking, it helps nobody. Simple advice I usually give: negotiate. It's a marriage, it's a contract. Perhaps I will start speaking, and if you feel the urge to run, you will ask me to please stop, and I will pause, but you won't run. And I will keep my finger on pause until you feel more ready to speak. But it works. Yeah, it works. Having that understanding. You will not run, and I will speak a little. But I will pause when you cannot handle it anymore. Another way of managing that is I will give you fair notice that I'm about to jump on you and start quarreling. I will let you know. So my sister-in-law would actually say, can we talk? Something is bothering me. And that's usually code for, you are annoying me, I'm not feeling the love right now, we need to quarrel. But her husband, when he hears that she's making an appointment, he knows, so he can prepare himself. All right, let's talk. And as I once said, and this is also based on science, women tend to have more words to give. More words to give. Men usually find talking very annoying and exhausting. So again, another gender difference. But back to this issue of conflict. So when we say set the right tone, then avoid these 4 things as much as possible. Learn how to stay on the issue. Someone once said, does this now mean we have to be very polite when we quarrel? And I said, no, not really. It depends. And the lady said, for my husband and I, we don't like all this politeness. So I'm talking, my voice is really loud, his voice is really loud, and we are going back and forth. We're even interrupting each other. And I asked, and are you both okay with that? She said, yes, we don't like all this drama and arranging the quarrel. We want to quarrel and get it over and done with. If it works for you, then it works for you. Loud voices, low voices, what works for both of you is most important. Just avoid these things, inshallah. Then, something else we need to also know. No, I think that's not important. These ones are fine.
They find that marriages that have no or minimum amount of conflict in the first year have the highest divorce rates by year number 3 and 4. Those marriages that had the highest level of disagreement and fighting, we're not talking about violence, but that type of conflict, actually had the lower divorce rates by year number 3 and 4. While conflict is painful, it is where differences come up. It is where people get to know what the other one doesn't really like. It is where the person gets known. In other words, it's an educational experience. It is a bonding. It is where I get to know the real you, and how much you cry tells me how serious it is for you. It is where the... Yes, some use crying as a weapon, and exactly. So, number one, conflict is useful. What happens in those families where they push the conflict under the carpet for the sake of the children? Put the conflict under the carpet for the sake of peace. What happens is the other person hurts you. You want to address this so that it is not repeated. You decide, for the sake of peace, push it under the carpet. But every time they do that, it hurts you more and more, and you start feeling cheated in this relationship. You start thinking, is that how I'm going to carry on for the rest of my life? It's a relationship withdrawal. It's an emotional withdrawal. And you start to lose respect for the person. You start to lose love for the person. What then happens is there's so much under the carpet that when you decide to address it, there's so much respect that has been lost, and so you do not handle the issue in a way that is courteous or respectful. And there's a great tendency, because you've lost respect, you show contempt, you look down upon the person. Actually, one of the signs of contempt is when you eye roll. Yeah. You know, when someone, and you just like, oh. If you catch yourself doing that, you are in trouble. If you catch yourself doing that, your ship is heading for the rocks. Stop it. So be very careful. And if your partner does it to you, sit down. Why? It's a non-verbal communication of disrespect. You don't do it to your mom. You don't do it to a stranger. Why? Because it will be very disrespectful. So the moment you find you're doing it to each other, you're doing it to your kid is doing it to you, it's the spelling of trouble. These four are described by some actually as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are like signs of the day of judgment. Yeah. So really identify them. Conflict is not the problem. It's the style. Do you fight in these 4 ways? If you do, you are in trouble. If you don't do it in this way, if you fight with adab, complaint, when you sense you are heading towards criticism, this is red light on the traffic light. Sorry, orange. Criticism is orange. But the moment you move into contempt, that's red light. Yeah. But complaint is green. It is good. It is useful. Now, one point that Salatu mentioned earlier is longitudinal studies that have studied marriages for up to 20-25 years. They made a list of the various reasons why couples fight. They fight over chores at home, they fight over sex, they fight over children, they fight over in-laws, they fight over money, they fight over time, they fight over 15 various things, like the most frequent. And they surveyed over 400 marriages in the first 3 years to identify what were they fighting about. And then they followed up these marriages 20 to 25 years later. And they realized that around over 70% of the issues they were fighting about in year 1 to 3, they're still fighting about 20-25 years later. Now what came out of that study, therefore, was it means out of your 4 arguments, 3 of them you'll still be arguing about in the next 25 years when your children have even graduated from university or have started graduating. And for people in that industry of marriage therapy, counseling, and this and that, they realize, therefore, that the issue on which people were arguing about is not actually the main issue. The good families were not the families that had resolved the issues. Here are very strong families that still have not resolved 75% of the issues. In fact, they are most likely going to die not having resolved these issues, but yet they are nice and healthy. So when you're quarreling, the solution to your quarreling is not necessarily going to solve your problem. Most of the issues you're quarreling about, you'll just need sabr. You just need to have more elasticity and manage. As human beings, we don't change a lot. However, what did become a predictor of marriage was not the issue you were quarreling about, but how you quarreled about it, even if it was not important. If you moved into criticism, especially if you moved into contempt, the moment you moved into a way in which you showed disrespect, so we're arguing about your coming late. We're arguing about your coming late from work or whatever. But how we argue about it, when you do it in an insulting way and I start saying, yeah, that's how your father was and that's how your mother was and that's how whatever, what's the response? Yeah, but your father also. And what, the issue of lateness is no more being discussed. We've started another problem. So how you handle conflict is more important than what the conflict is about. So when you have couples, whether it's you or anybody else, that are having a fight, don't even be too interested in what is the fight about. It could be important, but be more concerned about whether the method of solving the problem compounds the problem or solves the problem. Yeah. So this issue, I'm just trying to underscore the importance of the adab with which you fight. When you show contempt to anybody, you know this is not Islam. Yeah, between you and Allah, you have a problem. So don't do anything to a person. Don't justify it. Because they hurt you, you would hurt back. Inshallah, and maybe I'll just say it now. At the core of successful relationship is the kind of person you are and the kind of person you want to become. You must work on becoming a better human being. That is at the core of it all. You don't get better relationships and you can keep getting rotten. Like, it doesn't work that way. So whether it's relationship with parents, with anybody, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Allah doesn't change the condition of a people unless they change what is within themselves. You have to keep working on yourself. So key point just to underscore there, very often in marriage, the problem can be the issue, but very often the problem is not the problem. It is how you solve the problem or how you try to solve the problem that ends up becoming actually the real problem. What we would like to do is a little exercise. We would like the brothers to form about 3 groups, sisters maybe, in short, just have groups of about 4 or 5. And we would like you to list as many people you know in Sirah, from Adam to the last. All the prophets. Which ones among them had family problems? And what was the kind of problem? Okay? In other words, just put yourself in the position. So I'll just start with one example. Put yourself in the position of Adam. What's the family problem you are facing? One son kills another child of mine. And what we would like is like carry on from there. How many in the seerah can you think of? Because it's important to ask, why would Allah want to remind us that good people had these type of families? Yeah, before you start, why does it happen to me? Why me? I'm in da'wah, you know, like things shouldn't be messed up for me, or I'm praying 5 times a day, etc. So we'd like that list, and inshallah, we'll read them out just as food for thought, because sometimes when you know people better than you have gone through challenges, it becomes a shock absorber even for yourself. So think of the men and the women in history. So let's get the groups if you don't mind. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. All. Oh yeah.